History has a specific sound, and it isn't the sound of glass breaking. It isn't the sound of a scream or a frantic trading floor. Before the rupture, history sounds like a steady, rhythmic hum. It is the sound of a machine that has been running so well for so long that we have forgotten it is a machine at all. We begin to think of it as nature, as something inevitable. In 1928, the hum was deafening. In 2006, it was a lullaby. And as we sit here in 2026, the hum has returned, deeper and more resonant than ever. We often use the word crash to describe 1929, but a crash implies an accident, a sudden loss of control on a rainy road. What happened in 1929 was not an accident. It was a rupture. It was the moment the tension between human perception and economic reality became so great that the fabric of the system simply could not hold. To understand why this matters now, we have to look at the illusion of stability. We have to look at the years where everything felt right, even though everything was becoming fundamentally wrong. Let's go back to 1925. The Great War was a fading memory. The world had entered the expansion phase of the H.E.A.R.T cycle. For the first time, the average person felt they had mastered the future. In the United States, the concept of the American standard wasn't just a political slogan, it was a visible reality. Electricity was reaching the rural heartland. The Ford Model T was no longer a luxury, but a tool. If you were standing on Wall Street in 1926, you weren't looking for a crash. You were looking at a new world. You were looking at a human reset that had successfully transitioned into a massive expansion of credit. The Federal Reserve, still a relatively young institution, seemed to have solved the problem of the panic. The old cycles of the 19th century, the brutal collapses of 1873 or 1893, were seen as ghosts of an uneducated past. We told ourselves, this time is different. It is the most dangerous sentence in the English language. In 1927, it was justified by technology. In 2005, it was justified by financial engineering. Today, in 2026, it is justified by liquidity and interconnectivity, but the psychology, the raw human impulse, is identical. The illusion of stability is built on a specific type of lie, the belief that a straight line can go up forever if you just make the line thick enough. By 1928, the American economy was no longer based on production, it was based on the expectation of production. We moved from an economy of now to an economy of someday. This is the asset inflation phase. When you look at the charts from that era, you see a vertical climb. But charts don't show the human cost of the climb. They don't show the farmer in Nebraska who mortgaged his future to buy more land because land only goes up. They don't show the shoe shiner in Manhattan who was buying RCA stock on 10% margin because the ticker never lies. Now, look at the parallel. Shift your mind to 2004. The dot-com burst was over. We felt we had survived the worst. The hum returned. Interest rates were low. The Great Moderation, as economists called it, suggested that volatility had been conquered. We weren't just building houses, we were building wealth vehicles. We believed that if you sliced a bad loan into enough small pieces and wrapped them in a shiny box, the risk would simply evaporate. The illusion of stability creates a blind spot. When things work for 10 years, we assume they will work for 11. When they work for 20, we assume the old rules of gravity have been repealed. This is the psychological expansion phase. It feels like a warm bath. It feels like safety. But in the H.E.A.R.T framework, this is exactly GAI. The structural integrity of the system begins to fail. Stability is, ironically, the greatest cause of instability. Because stability encourages leverage. Leverage encourages excess. And excess, inevitably, leads to the rupture. Why does this matter in 2026? Because we have just lived through the longest period of artificial stability in human history. From 2009 to the early 2022s, the global markets were held in a state of suspended animation. We used credit not just to expand, but to prevent the natural reset from happening. We treated the rupture as something that could be indefinitely postponed through policy. But history suggests that the rupture is not a choice, it is a mathematical necessity. In 1929, The rupture happened because the gap between the price of the stock and the value of the company became a canyon. In 2008, it happened because the gap between the value of the house and the income of the owner became a canyon. In 2026, we are looking at a different canyon. It is the gap between the digital representation of wealth and the physical reality of our world. We have more money than ever before, yet we feel a strange, creeping scarcity. We have all-time highs, yet the mood on the street is one of exhaustion. This is the final stage of the illusion. It is the stage where we stop looking at the ground and only look at the clouds. Think about the psychology of the investor in 1929 versus today. In 1929, there was no internet, but there was a network. It was a network of whispers, of telegrams, of newspapers that everyone read at the same time. The "this time is different" narrative was fueled by the emergence of the radio, the first time a single voice could reach millions. It felt like a new age. Today, we have the same phenomenon, magnified 1 billion times. We have algorithms that ensure we only hear the hum. We have social feeds that reinforce the expansion. We have created a hall of mirrors where the illusion of stability is reflected back at us from every screen. But if you listen closely, if you stop looking at the ticker and start looking at the structural beams of the building, you can hear the creaking. The rupture of 1929 didn't start on Black Tuesday. It started months, even years, earlier. It started when the first few smart people realized that the credit expansion had reached its limit. It started when the leverage became too heavy to lift. Most people think a crash is a sudden event. It isn't. It is the end of a long, quiet process of decay. The 1,920 seconds were roaring, yes. But they were roaring to drown out the sound of the foundation cracking. Before we move into the mechanics of how this happens, I want you to sit with this feeling. The feeling of 1928. The feeling of 2007. The feeling of right now. That feeling where everything looks perfect on paper, but you have a knot in your stomach that you can't quite explain. That knot is your internal compass, recognizing that the illusion of stability is reaching its expiration date. We like to believe we're in control. We like to believe that they, the central banks, the governments, the experts, have a plan. But history shows that in the face of a rupture, there is no plan. There is only the transition. When the rupture comes, it doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't care about your portfolio. It doesn't care about the new era technology you've invested in. It only cares about one thing: returning the system to reality. In 1929, reality was a cold, hard floor. In 2008, reality was a vacant suburban lot. In 2026, reality will be something else entirely. But the path to that reality is always the same. It starts with a period of profound, unshakable confidence. It starts with the belief that we have finally, after thousands of years, outsmarted the cycle. We haven't. We are simply in the quiet moment before the break. A moment where the weight of our own choices begins to pull the curtain back on the mechanics of debt. To understand the rupture, you must understand the fuel. And the fuel is always credit. In the H.E.A.R.T framework, the expansion of credit is the most seductive phase. It is the period where we convince ourselves that we have discovered a way to spend tomorrow's labor today without ever having to pay it back. In the mid-1920 seconds, this was a brand new magic trick. Before then, if you wanted a car or a radio or a tractor, you saved your gold and you paid for it. But by 1926, the installment plan had arrived. Buy now, pay later wasn't just a convenience, it was a psychological shift. It broke the link between effort and reward. For the first time, the economy wasn't growing because we were producing more, it was growing because we were borrowing more. By 1929, the American consumer was stretched thin. But the real danger wasn't the car payments, it was the leverage in the financial system. In 1929, you could buy stocks on 10% margin. That means if you had $100, you could buy $1,000 worth of shares. It feels like a miracle when the market goes up. If the stock rises 10%, you have doubled your money. But leverage is a double-edged sword that cuts through the bone. If that same stock drops 10%, your entire investment is gone. you are wiped out. This was the silent shift. We had built a skyscraper of wealth, but the foundation was made of IOUs. Now, look at 2008. The mechanism was different, but the physics were the same. It wasn't margin calls on stocks, it was leverage in the housing market. People were buying homes with 0% down, sometimes even negative equity loans. Banks were taking those loans, bundling them, and then borrowing 30 times their own value against them. Think about that number for a moment. 30 to 1. It means if the value of their assets dropped by just 3%, the bank was insolvent. It was gone. We told ourselves the same thing in 2008 that they told themselves in 1929. The system is too big to break. We believed that because the risk was spread out, it had somehow vanished. But you cannot destroy risk, you can only move it around. And when you move risk into the dark, into the shadows of the credit market, it grows, it festers. This brings us to the most dangerous part of the cycle, when the smart people start to be wrong. In every cycle, there is a moment where the experts, the PhDs, the heads of the great banks become the most delusional people in the room. In 1929, it was Irving Fisher, one of the greatest economists in history, who famously said stocks had reached a permanently high plateau just days before the fall. In 2007, it was the heads of the major rating agencies and central banks saying that subprime was contained. Why do they miss it? Because they are looking at the hum, they are looking at the illusion of stability. They believe their own models more than they believe the reality of human behavior. They forget that credit is not just numbers on a screen. It is a promise. And a promise is only as good as the person's ability to keep it. As we navigate through 2026, the parallel is haunting. We have moved from the leverage of individuals in 1929 to the leverage of banks in 2008 to the leverage of entire nations today. We have entered a period where the expansion of credit is no longer about buying cars or houses. It is about sustaining the system itself. We are borrowing money to pay the interest on the money we already borrowed. In the H.E.A.R.T cycle, this is the asset inflation phase reaching its peak. Prices go up, not because things are getting better, but because the currency is getting weaker. The leverage today is silent. It isn't always visible in margin accounts. It's hidden in shadow banking, in complex derivatives, and in the balance sheets of central banks that have grown to sizes that were unthinkable 20 years ago. We are living in a 1929 world with 2026 speed. In 1929, it took days for a margin call to travel across the country. In 2008, it took hours for the contagion to spread from New York to London. Today, it takes milliseconds. The silent shift has become an instantaneous shift. What happens when the leverage stops working? What happens when the person on the other end of the promise says, "I can't pay"? In 1929, the trigger was a small rise in interest rates by the Fed designed to cool off the speculation. They wanted a gentle breeze, but they started a hurricane. They didn't realize that when you have 10 to 1 leverage, you can't cool off the market. You can only break it. In 2008, the trigger was a small decline in housing prices in a few specific states. Again, the experts thought it was contained. They didn't realize that the entire global financial system was tied to those few houses in Nevada and Florida. And here is the truth that most people refuse to see. The trigger doesn't actually matter. Whether it is a virus, a war, a bank failure, or a change in interest rates, the trigger is just the final grain of sand that causes the pile to collapse. The real cause is the pile itself. The real cause is the leverage. The real cause is the credit that was expanded beyond the point of no return. The most painful part of this phase is watching the silent shift become visible. It's that moment when the average person realizes they've been sold a future that cannot be delivered. In 1929, that realization came when the ticker tape couldn't keep up with the falling prices. In 2008, it came when people saw the logos of 100-year-old banks being taken down from buildings overnight. In 2026, it will come when the liquidity we have relied on for so long simply vanishes. Because credit is like oxygen. You don't notice it until it's gone. And when it's gone, everyone starts gasping at the same time. We are currently standing in that narrow gap between the expansion and the rupture. The credit has been spent. The assets have been inflated. The leverage is at its maximum tension. The system is now looking for a reason to break. And as we have seen, it always finds one. Not because it is malicious, but because it is seeking balance. It is seeking the reset that we have spent decades trying to avoid. In 1929, they called it a correction at first. They told people to buy the dip. They told them the fundamentals of the country are sound. They said the same thing in the summer of 2008. But a rupture is not a correction. A correction fixes a price. A rupture fixes a lifestyle. It fixes a worldview. It forces a society to stop living on someday and start living on now. It is the moment where the smart people stop talking and the math starts screaming. The shift is silent right up until the moment it is deafening. We have been moving toward this point for a long time. The expansion was long, the inflation was high, and the leverage is deep. History shows us that the longer the expansion, the more violent the rupture, not because of a lack of policy, but because of the sheer weight of the promises that must now be broken. As the tension reaches its breaking point, we have to move past the numbers and the charts. We have to look at what happens when the fabric finally gives way. We have to look at the rupture itself, not as a financial event, but as a human one. Because when reality breaks, it doesn't just break the banks. It breaks the way we see the world and the way we see each other. The rupture is the moment the lie can no longer be sustained. It is the point in the H.E.A.R.T cycle where the R takes over and the transition begins. But we must be clear. The crash is not the cause. The crash is simply the symptom. The rupture is the reality of 1,000 bad decisions, a decade of over-leverage, and a century of human ego, all coming due at once. In 1929, the rupture didn't happen in a single day. Black Tuesday was just the punctuation mark at the end of a very long, painful sentence. The true rupture was the breaking of the social contract. It was the moment when the average person who had done everything right found themselves standing in a line for bread. We look at the black and white photos of the 1,930 seconds and we see statistics. We see 25% unemployment. We see GDP contraction. But statistics are a way to avoid feeling the pain of history. The rupture is not a number. The rupture is the sound of a father telling his children there is no dinner tonight. It is the sight of a businessman who weeks ago was worth millions, selling apples on a street corner in a wool suit. It is the total, sudden, and violent loss of dignity. In 2008, the rupture looked different, but the emotional frequency was the same. It was the for sale signs that sprouted like weeds in suburban cul-de-sacs. It was the sound of cardboard boxes being taped shut in the offices of Lehman Brothers Bank. It was the realization that the home, which we were told was a safe investment, was actually a debt trap that could be taken away by a computer algorithm in a city we'd never visited. The human cost of the rupture is always underestimated by the people who manage the system. They talk about liquidity injections and systemic stability, but they don't talk about the psychological scarring of a generation. When the rupture happens, the first thing to break is trust. In 1929, people lost trust in the banks. They stood in the rain, banging on locked glass doors, demanding their life savings, only to be told the money was gone, not stolen, just gone. It had evaporated back into the credit ether from which it was born. In 2008, we lost trust in the institutions. We watched as the people who created the mess were given bonuses, while the people who lost their homes were given eviction notices. And in 2026, the trust that is breaking is even more fundamental. It is the trust in the value of the currency itself. It is the trust in the idea that tomorrow will look like today. When reality breaks, it happens fast. We like to think we have time to prepare, but the rupture is a non-linear event. It is like a dam. A dam can have cracks for 20 years and nothing happens. The water stays behind the wall. But when the pressure hits a certain point, the entire structure doesn't leak. It dissolves. This is the phase where the smart people become silent. The models stop working. The Fed put stops working. The buy the dip strategy becomes a catch the falling knife tragedy. In 1930, after the initial crash, the market actually rallied. People thought the worst was over. They thought they were being brave by jumping back in. They didn't realize they were standing in the middle of a rupture that would last a decade. They didn't realize that the system was being reset at a fundamental level. Why does the rupture feel so violent? Because we have built our lives on the expansion. We have designed our lifestyles, our debts, and our very identities around the idea that the line always goes up. When the line stops, when the line goes down. We don't just lose money. We lose our sense of who we are. This is the human cost that no one warns you about. In the 1,930 seconds, the suicide rate didn't just spike among stockbrokers. It spiked among ordinary people who couldn't face the shame of failure. In 2008, the deaths of despair began a climb that has never truly stopped. The rupture forces us to face a truth we hate, that we are not as in control as we think. In 2026, we are seeing the psychological symptoms of the rupture before the financial one even fully manifests. There is a sense of pre-traumatic stress. We see it in the anger on social media, the polarization of politics, the feeling that something is deeply, fundamentally wrong, even if the stock market is at a record high. That is the rupture of the soul, before the rupture of the market. I want you to imagine the atmosphere in a wealthy neighborhood in 1929. The parties had stopped, the lights were off, the silence was heavier than the noise that came before. Now imagine 2008, the quiet of a neighborhood where half the houses are empty, their lawns turning brown, their windows dark. This is what happens when the credit expansion is pulled back. The expansion is a party fueled by tomorrow's energy. The rupture is the hangover where you realize you didn't just spend tomorrow's money, you spent tomorrow's peace of mind. We are often told that liquidity is a technical term. It isn't. Liquidity is the grease that keeps the gears of society turning. When liquidity dries up, the gears grind against each other. Friction increases. People turn against their neighbors. Nations turn against each other. In the 1,930 seconds, the financial rupture led directly to the political rupture. It led to the rise of ideologies that promised safety in exchange for freedom. It led to walls being built, both physical and economic. We are seeing those same walls being built today. If you are feeling a sense of dread, it is because you are paying attention. The rupture is the moment where the asset inflation we enjoyed in the good years turns into debt deflation. It is a black hole that sucks everything in. But there is a specific type of person who survives the rupture. It isn't the person with the most money. It isn't the person with the most information. It is the person who accepts the reality of the break first. In 1929, the people who survived were the ones who didn't wait for the bounce. They were the ones who realized the world had changed, and they changed with it. They liquidated, they simplified, they moved from growth to preservation. In 2008, it was the same. The people who tried to wait it out in homes they couldn't afford were devastated. The people who accepted the loss and moved on were able to rebuild. The rupture is a brutal teacher, but it is an honest one. It strips away the leverage and the illusion and leaves you with what is real. As we look toward the remainder of 2026, we must understand that we cannot stop the rupture. We have already built the pile of sand too high. The laws of physics and the laws of the H.E.A.R.T cycle are now in charge. We are moving into the transition. But before we can reach the other side, we have to go through the break. We have to experience the moment where the hum stops and the silence begins. It is in that silence that we find out who we really are. It is in that silence that we realize that wealth was never the numbers on the screen, but the resilience of our character and the strength of our connections. The world is about to get very quiet. The noise of the expansion is fading. The frantic energy of the leverage is exhausting itself. When reality breaks, it feels like the end of the world. But history tells a different story. It tells us that the rupture is the only way to clear the path for something new. The problem is, we are so used to moving fast that we have forgotten how to survive the slow. And as the gears of the global economy begin to seize, we are about to be forced to learn. We have spent decades using fast as a shield, fast money, fast growth, fast solutions. But as we enter the final phase of this map, we realize that fast is what got us here, and slow is the only way out. The rupture is not the end of the road. It is the moment the road changes direction. We are now standing at the edge of the map. Behind us lies the illusion, the credit expansion, and the jagged edge of the rupture. In the H.E.A.R.T framework, we call this the transition. It is the most misunderstood phase because it feels like standing still. It feels like a void. But history tells us that the void is where the new world is actually built. As we look at 2026, everyone is asking the same question: what should I do? They want a tactic. They want a hedge. They want a button to press that will make the discomfort go away. They want to move fast because fast feels like progress. But in a transition, speed is not your friend. Speed is a liability. In the 1,930 seconds, the people who tried to play the market to win back what they lost ended up losing twice. They were moving at 1,928 speed in a 1932 world. They were trying to apply the logic of a boom to the reality of a bust. Today, in 2026, we are seeing the same error. People are trying to find the next big thing, the next leverage play, the next hyper-growth asset to escape the coming stagnation. They are running toward the fire, thinking it's an exit. I am not here to give you advice. I am not here to predict which line on a chart will move first. I am here to tell you that the most powerful weapon you have in 2026 is not your portfolio. It is your pace. When a system enters a rupture, it becomes hyper-volatile. It becomes a machine designed to strip wealth from the panicked. If you are moving at the speed of the headlines, you are moving at the speed of the machine. You are a component to be consumed. But when you slow down, you step outside the machine. Think about the survivors of the Great Depression. They didn't survive because they were smarter than the market. They survived because they became resilient. They simplified. They reduced their surface area to the rupture. They stopped relying on the credit that had evaporated and started relying on the real. They moved from financial assets to human assets. In 2026, your human assets are your only true defense. Your ability to think clearly when everyone else is shouting. Your ability to wait while everyone else is running. Your ability to recognize that a transition cannot be rushed. The map for 2026 is not a set of directions. It is a state of mind. It is the realization that we are not just in a financial crisis, we are in a psychological reset. We have been living at a frantic, unsustainable pace for 30 years. We have treated our lives like a 24-hour trading desk. We have optimized for efficiency, but we have destroyed our resilience. The transition phase of the H.E.A.R.T cycle is nature's way of forcing us to rest. If you look at the 1,940 seconds, after the rupture of the 30 seconds, a new world was born. It was a world built on a human reset. People had a different relationship with debt. They had a different relationship with community. They had a different relationship with time. They weren't looking for 10x returns. They were looking for stability. They were looking for enough. As we move deeper into 2026, the concept of enough is going to become the most radical idea in the world. The system will try to pull you back into the panic. It will try to convince you that if you don't act now, you will be left behind. But when you are in a rupture, behind is often the safest place to be. Slow down your consumption of information, slow down your decision-making, slow down your expectations of the future. The expansion phase told us that the future was a place of endless growth. The transition tells us that the future is a place of deep correction. Both are true in their own time. But we are no longer in the time of growth. In 1929, the smartest men in the room were the ones who lost the most because they couldn't imagine a world that was slow. They couldn't imagine a world where the ticker tape stopped. Today, the smartest people are the ones who are preparing for the silence. They are the ones who are disentangling themselves from the leverage. They are the ones who are building small while everyone else is still trying to build big. The transition is not a tragedy unless you are clinging to the illusion. If you are trying to hold on to 2021, 2026 will be a nightmare. But if you accept that the rupture has happened and that the old world is not coming back, you can begin to see the map for what it is. It is a map to a different kind of wealth. We are all waiting for the bottom. We are all waiting for the signal that it is safe to go back to the way things were. But there is no back. There is only through. The 1929 rupture didn't end with a recovery. It ended with a transformation. It ended with a world that looked, felt, and operated differently than the one that came before. We are in that transformation now. You cannot out-trade a rupture. You cannot out-leverage a transition. You can only outlast it. And the way to outlast it is to stop running. Look at the history of the H.E.A.R.T. Human reset, expansion of credit, asset inflation, rupture, transition. We have lived through the first three. We are currently experiencing the fourth. The fifth is where we will spend the next decade. It will be a decade of less. But it could also be a decade of more clarity, more connection, more reality. In 1929, they called it the Great Depression. But for many who lived through it, it was also the Great Awakening. It was the moment the illusion died and the truth was all that was left. As the hum of the old world finally fades, don't be afraid of the silence. The silence is where you find your footing. The silence is where you see the map clearly. The silence is where you realize that you don't need to run anymore. The world is changing. Let it change. The system is breaking. Let it break. You are still here. And for the first time in a long time, you have the chance to move at your own pace. Take it.